Welcome to the Hey Docs podcast with your host, Jill Allen. Today we are diving into a critical topic, cybersecurity. Our guest, Jordan Janz from Cornerstone, is here to help us understand the threats practices face, like phishing and ransomware, and more importantly, how to defend against them. From practical training tips to real-life examples of cyber attacks and their solutions, this episode is packed with actionable advice to protect your practice and your patients. Let's get started. Hey docs, is your team overwhelmed by endless admin tasks? Let My Ortho VA throw you a lifeline. With expert HIPAA-trained virtual assistants specializing in orthodontics, My Ortho VA helps streamline everything from billing and insurance to phone support and reporting. Right now, over 100 VAs are supporting 58 practices nationwide, cutting staffing costs by up to 60%. No onboarding fees, no long-term contracts. Just a simple, cost-effective way to transform your operations and focus on patient satisfaction. Brace for growth. Visit myorthova.com to interview your next best hire and align your practice for success. Jordan, I am so excited to have you on Hey Docs. Welcome.
Great to be here. Good to see you, Jill.
Yes. It's been a long time coming getting you on the show, so I'm super excited for today's episode. One of the ways I like to start out Hey Docs is to just have my guests introduce themselves, tell a little bit about yourself, about Cornerstone. So if you wouldn't mind jumping in and doing that first for me.
Yeah, happy to. So my name is Jordan Janz. I'm a part of the team here at Cornerstone Computer Solutions. So we are a dental and ortho-specific provider. And the specificity of that is really funny. I did not go to school for IT. I went for business, for marketing, for management. One of my close personal friends that I grew up with, her husband is still one of my best friends. Her dad was the founder of Cornerstone back in 2005. In 2011, 2012, I was looking to make a change. And my friend Danielle said, well, I think my dad is looking for some help at growing Cornerstone. So maybe you should have a conversation with him. So I sit down for lunch with Dan Van Epps. He's still in the industry with Henry Schein. And he said, well, we're an IT provider, but we work specifically with dental practices. And I thought, you're nuts. Why would you be so specific? He explained a little bit to me about why Cornerstone has been so specific. And all of a sudden, 12 going on 13 years later and actually owning the business now after Dan transitioned out, I'm on board. There's sense. A lot of value, as Jill, from being an expert in a niche rather than trying to do too much, too wide. So kind of two sides of the business at Cornerstone. We're heavily involved on project planning and installation. So for any docs who have any sort of a construction project, whether it's a startup or a new location or an expansion, we're involved pretty early in the floor plan phase to plan out all the IT infrastructure, cabling, computers, printers, cameras, phones, all that good stuff. Make sure that we have a good plan with the rest of the team. Everything gets installed and tested. And then obviously a huge part of what we do is manage services. And when we hear that term as it relates to the IT world, all that word managed means is somebody's watching it. Somebody's being proactive. So you hear the words managed antivirus software or a managed switch or a managed firewall, or even a huge part of our business is managed service plans. Anytime you hear that word, it's basically rather than the old school break fix where IT companies would come and install something, leave a business card and say, hey, if anything catches fire, give us a call and we'll dig in and see how we can help. Now we can be a lot more preventative and proactive. So honestly, probably an even bigger part of our business is supporting practices once they're up and running with help desk support. Obviously, the security and cybersecurity part is an important topic.
Yeah. And what a great segue, because that is exactly what I want to jump in and talk about today is that support that you guys give, but just why we need to, in our industry, be aware of the cyber threats that are out there. And more importantly, not think that we are like, there's not a chance at all that we're too small. Nobody's going to look it up. There's nothing we have to worry about. And I think we can all agree over, especially the last 5 years, and we continue to hear about little bits of cybersecurity and cyber threats popping up. It is something that all of us, even in our smaller niche, need to pay attention to. So what I would love is if we can just kind of start with the basics and kind of jump in on that topic. And the first area that I would like to talk a little bit about is phishing. And I'm not talking fish and pole and a rod phishing. I'm talking the pH phishing. And I'm wondering if you can just explain that a little bit, and let's dive in there first.
Yeah, as much as I'd love to talk about phishing on the dream stream, we'll talk about the the more scary version.
Yeah.
So phishing at a high level, that's a term when cyber criminals use deceptive emails, texting now. Honestly, even voice calls are becoming more prominent. But for this example, we'll mention email, where they try to trick you into clicking on a link, opening an attachment that will install malware. And when I say malware, that's just a malicious software on your device that typically either takes you to a fake website built to bait you into revealing personal information, things like financial information, passwords, credit card details, things like that, or flat out gaining that information directly. So one thing that we're seeing a lot more of now moving into 2025 is something they call spear phishing. That's a term when a phishing email is addressed to a specific individual. So that occurs when a cyber criminal is able to gather personal information on their target. And if it's more personal, obviously it increases the chances of the attack being successful. There is a whole bunch of other options when we go into texting and video and voice call, but phishing at a high level is a bad actor trying to trick somebody into disclosing information.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because my team, we do quarterly team meetings. And one of our topics was this whole, just the security component. And we actually did a whole thing on phishing, just even for my own employees to learn about it. And when you say spear phishing, I'm thinking, and there's whale phishing, and there's so many different acronyms that if a listener were to go out and really kind of look it up, it really is pretty scary. And the reason I think it's so important to even just talk about is, docs, a lot of times your team members are the ones that are your first line in the email. And to what Jordan is saying is these people out there, these imposters, are so good. Like the emails look authentic, everything. You really have to know what you're looking for. And I think it is very easy for a team member moving very quickly to jump in and be like, oh, they're asking for Doc's tax ID number or Doc's social. And yep, this looks right. And you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They just move really quick through. And before we know it, we've given away too much information. Or like you said, we've clicked on a link that kind of attached to something on the back end. I don't know if you want to add any more to that, but that is definitely something that we are going through to help our clients just be more aware.
Sure. And again, it's moving so quickly. And unfortunately, the emergence of AI, there's some tremendous tools and benefits to it, some things that we at Cornerstone are using on the prevention and protection side of things. Those same tools are being used by the bad guys to get better at what they're doing. So not too many years ago, these phishing, the things that we looked at would be misspell words or suspicious web addresses. Spelling and grammatical errors were pretty common. That's getting less and less now. The things that I would tell people to be more on the lookout for are the urgency, like you said. It will probably look legitimate if it's somebody that is targeting a practice. The likelihood of grammatical errors and misspelled words are slim. Now, I would say the biggest thing to look out for would be kind of that urgent call to action, some sort of scare tactics. If I were to believe a text message I got this morning, the Arapahoe County Sheriff should be here any minute because I missed my jury duty. So if there's a kind of that urgent call to action that would cause a team member to say, hey, I've got to do this before I talk to anybody, that should be the red flag, right? Even requests to verify personal information, going a little bit more old school and calling that vendor directly. If it's a bank, knowing what they will and will not ask for on a text, on an email is useful to know. If there's ever a question, I would say take a breath, slow down, and call, verify the information that's being requested. Talk to the doc, talk to your whatever vendor is involved. I think the slower we go, especially if we feel that sense of urgency, the better. And then there are really smart people who are paying attention to things that still get hacked. So it's not, I think that's the flip side of it, of sometimes it's kind of this embarrassment, like, oh my gosh, how did I fall for that? Why did I click on that? There are very smart people who are in this industry. There have been IT companies that have fallen victim to some of these things. So then knowing, to your point, that employee training of knowing what I'm looking for on the front end, but if something happens, knowing what I do from there, disconnect the computer in all forms, take it out of not only the Ethernet cable, unplug it from the wall, disconnect your wireless access point. Don't run any programs on that computer. Call your IT provider immediately. Having that plan that is documented and explained to the staff can be invaluable in a situation like that.
Yeah. Oh, such good advice. And that kind of leads me into the scary thing that we all hear, that buzzword, which is ransomware, and what that does when something like that gets onto our computers and starts doing things to our files on the back end that sometimes we don't even know. And I know that there are programs out there that even track keystrokes where all of a sudden they're learning your passwords and we don't even know that this is on there. So I'm wondering if you can high level just talk a little bit about that, and is there some basic things that we can be aware of, or just, again, I think going into a new year, what can doctors do just to maybe help themselves a little bit?
Yeah, and it's interesting, at the very beginning we didn't sync up on that, but you stole the words out of my mouth when you said there may be a sense of, well, I'm too small for this. I think the two myths that I run into most commonly in our world are, number one, like you said, I'm too small to be a target. They're going after DSOs, hospitals, municipalities. They're not going to come after Main Street orthodontics. I'm not a big enough target. Secondly, and we can dive into that as much or as little as you like, but the idea that I'm on the cloud, so none of this applies to me. I don't have a server in the IT closet. This is my software's responsibility. But to your point about ransomware and our conversation so far, there was a study that Verizon has done for many years now. The 2024 study is already out. And they estimate 82% was the number. 82% of ransomware events had some sort of human error factored into it. Meaning that employee education and training is the most important way to protect yourself. We could talk about software and firewalls and network monitoring and password management and all these fancy things that as an IT provider we can do. Honestly, a well-trained team is your best and first line of defense against cyber threats. Even the best technology can't help you if your team doesn't know how to use it safely. So we can certainly dive into some things. Come to mind their web traffic, how they're using email, passwords, you had mentioned. We can certainly dig into employee education and training. But I would say that is actually number one priority for practices on the prevention side of things. And again, some of the cybersecurity experts and firms that work with the FBI in the event of a breach, they would tell us that kind of the scary, and not to be the bearer of bad news, there is a prevailing thought in cybersecurity in 2024 and 2025 that for most of us, it is a question of when and not if there is a breach. And that is not dependent on what kind of antivirus software you're using, what kind of firewall you have in the closet. It is complicated enough, and there are enough moving pieces because, again, all of this exists on that spectrum of security and usability or functionality that we could all go back to paper charts and we could ask architects to start designing those dark rooms again. And we'd be much more secure, and functionality, the care that we'd be able to offer patients would be dramatically different. Again, on the IT side of things, we could set up a network with no firewall, no antivirus software. Every account has full admin access to anything and everything. It would be really usable and functional and quick and easy to use for about a day before it all became crashing down. So we need to find that line and walk that tightrope of what do I need to do on a security side of things? How does my budget as a small business factor into that? Because okay, you tell me Target experienced a data breach. I guarantee they spend a lot more on cybersecurity than my top line in a year. So what are the best places that I can allocate budget to reasonably protect my practice while at the same time maintaining a good, reasonable amount of functionality, usability on the network? Some other things that come to mind as far as maybe a priority list of what practices can do to protect against ransomware. And then we probably should talk about, okay, if it's true that it may be a matter of when and not if, what does remediation look like? What do we do if something happens?
Yes, I would definitely want to get to that.
But I would say the next step is investing in a high-end antivirus, anti-ransomware. software. So at Cornerstone, we use a product called ThreatLocker Zero Trust Endpoint Protection. Again, in the IT world, when you see that word zero trust, that's becoming more popular in kind of the higher end business class enterprise settings. What zero trust means is it's actually a pretty fascinating marriage of setup and actually AI learning that learns what that computer does. It learns what that computer needs to do its job. A lot of that is set up by a company like Cornerstone when we onboard a practice. There is also an AI learning component that learns what that computer does on a day-to-day basis. It does not allow that computer to execute things that are outside of its approved tasks. It does not allow it to run programs. It does not allow it to accept inputs like flash drives if it is not authorized. Now, again, on that scale of security and functionality, that probably errs a little bit more to the security side of things. But what we've seen in ransomwares and viruses in the past 5 years is the risk of that spreading on a network. There's an importance not only on preventing the issue in the first place, but also quarantining a problematic computer before it has a chance to infect the rest of the network. So there are other good options out there. ThreatLocker is just the one that we feel, at least at this moment in time, does the best job of that. But again, I'll point back to the word managed. It's a managed antivirus, managed anti-ransomware software. Yeah. So rather than installing it, setting it for automatic updates, and then letting it run, it's important to have a software that's actually being monitored and reporting back to your IT provider, to a network administrator. So when and if it notices something, there's an expert intervening rather than it popping up and who knows if it's being attended to.
So I want to just ask you a question because this comes up so much, and I have probably even been swayed to give advice in one direction versus another. But I just want to circle back around to everything that you're saying, landing on your last point, and my docs that use Macs versus PCs. And if we can tie it in just a little bit to cloud versus server, because I would say for the most part now, and I think you would agree with me, especially in the orthodontic field, almost every new practice is setting up on a cloud where it's so Correct. Rare now that we're going to have a server in an office anymore. And I think we're easily 50-50 on Macs versus PCs. So I'm wondering if, and I know that this is kind of everyone's going to have their own thoughts on this, but if you can kind of speak to that, because to some extent, when you say malware on a Mac, a lot of times people are like, oh, hell no, I'm not putting anything like that on my system. So would you mind kind of taking us down that road a little bit, just in your professional opinion?
Yeah, happy to. So I totally agree with the numbers that you're throwing out there. A huge part of our technical staff is more Apple Mac focused even than PC, just because it is becoming more prominent. I think the conception in the past that Apple Mac environments are immune to hacks, to ransomwares, to cyber events is incorrect. There has been traditionally a bigger target on PC, on the Windows world, just because of the market share. Yeah. It has been much more common to have Windows operating systems than Mac. But everything that we've talked about so far as training, education, antivirus software is still applicable in an Apple environment and still applicable in a cloud environment. A cloud environment exists think of it as a shared responsibility model, right? Where there is a third-party vendor hosting your data. And there are some things that they need to do to make sure that's secure, that's accessible to practices. That door opens both ways, because in a cloud environment, every single computer, even more so than a server environment, every single computer on that network is online every single second of every single day, because there still is a server infrastructure out there with your software on it. But instead of sitting in your IT closet down the hall, now it's being hosted in multiple data centers. You're connecting to that through your internet connection. Possibly even more important is something like a firewall. That's obviously a HIPAA requirement, but what a firewall does is all data coming and going through the internet has to pass through that firewall before landing on any of your internal devices. So having a business class and enterprise level firewall, or sometimes called a security gateway, is really important. And that doesn't have to be cost prohibitive. We recommend a lot of times you unify equipment. So a high-end business class firewall is under $1,000. It's not cheap, but it's not cost prohibitive to implement. But something like that whether it's Windows, whether it's Mac, whether it's server-based, whether it's cloud-based, all of that is still applicable. The fork in the road really comes to data backups and recovery as it relates to server-based versus cloud-based. Who has that data? Where is that data? That's what is tweaked a little bit. So for our practices who are storing anything, and even if it's practice management, if there's any local imaging, even down to internal documents that are stored locally, anything that is not being synced in multiple sites through a third-party cloud vendor, anything that's being saved locally, obviously we need to have good backups. And that leads us a little bit into the remediation part of the conversation okay, what do we do if something happens?
Yeah, which is exactly where I want to go next.
Perfect. Yeah. So I mean, really having a complete daily, and actually in 2025, the idea of a daily backup is a little bit antiquated for our customers who are storing anything locally. So that may look like a domain server that's hosting their practice management, their imaging, absolutely everything on site still. Or for our cloud customers who still may have some sort of data that they save locally, a twofold approach. We use again, in the world, it's called BCDR, Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery. And when I say the idea of daily backups is getting a little bit antiquated, it's because the BCDR program that we use at Cornerstone as a part of our managed service plan, it actually takes 15-minute snapshots of the network. That's great. And that frequency ensures that in the event of a data loss, corruption, a cyber attack, we'll have access to the most up-to-date recovery points. So rather than a daily recovery point, we literally have 15-minute recovery points. And that minimizes downtime, data loss, compared to old school backup solutions which left some pretty critical gaps in data protection. A good solid BCDR solution like that provides continuous, almost near real-time protection and recovery if something happens.
Yeah, I love that. And having been in this industry for so long and just seeing the changes, to me, that really does make so much sense that when we think about how much we do now, like I've been doing this for 30 years. So when what we were doing 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, and the amount of, just information that was flowing back and forth on a computer is so much different now. And I think it is something to really have us just maybe take a moment and pause and think about really, truly everything now is set up on those computers. And how much could we lose in trying to recreate an entire day anymore in those 15-minute bumps? So kind of going off of that, and I do want to just, because there's so much to talk about in the event that we have an event, and I just don't want to lose time on talking about that.
Hey docs. If you want to have a great business, the right practice management software is essential. But some can be slow, outdated, and lacking good support. That's why I recommend Greyfinch to all orthodontists. It's the fastest, most reliable, and most secure platform to grow your business and improve your efficiency. It's completely web-based, so you can run your entire practice anywhere and from any device with no servers, no downloads, or hidden fees. They even have the most helpful and responsive support team around. Right now, Greyfinch is giving a $500 discount to our listeners. Visit greyfinch.com/Jill Allen to learn more and see why it's one of the fastest growing providers in America. Hey docs, let's talk about SmileSuite, because it's not just another scheduling system. It's a game changer in the world of new patient management. And as a proud SmileSuite partner, I've witnessed the incredible impact it has on practices of all sizes. SmileSuite means your new patient calls and web leads are expertly handled 7 days a week, even during nights and weekends. And they offer top-notch customizable presentation software and seamless post-consultation follow-up. It's like having a secret weapon for your practice's success. Curious? Dive into the revolution at GetSmileSuite.com. And don't forget to mention Hey Docs to unlock some extra goodies. Elevate your practice with SmileSuite, because every smile deserves a suite of excellence.
So I'm wondering if you can just kind of take us down that next road of what happens, how do we deal with it if there is some type of an attack or whatnot, and maybe there is ransomware that's put onto our system. Do you mind kind of, is this a good point to kind of transition into that, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. My advice there would be if there is a concern from a doc or from someone on staff that says, gosh, I'm getting this error message. I'm getting that scary ransom. I'm maybe shouldn't have clicked on that. I glossed over a little bit earlier, but the idea there is disconnect the computer in all forms, unplug it from Ethernet, unplug it from the power outlet. Again, in an abundance of caution, it would be a good idea to disconnect the wireless access point in the office as well. We're just trying to help quarantine that problem and make sure it doesn't spread. So disconnecting that wireless access point in all forms. Again, the Ethernet cable, unplugging it from power to be safe, not running any new programs. And really that first call should be to the IT provider. Say, hey, we're dealing with this. We need some help. The process from there. And honestly, when that has happened to clients of Cornerstone, obviously we jump into action right away, determine the scope of what happened, assess the level of the risk. Now, depending on the type of breach, there are some realities of regulatory compliance, incident response, forensic investigations on some of those bigger ones. That leads into something that's a little bit bigger than what any provider, any MSP, a managed service provider like Cornerstone, can or at least should offer. So that would be a third party. We've vetted a couple of compliance vendors that really focus on that. Think of it the kind of the forensic investigation piece, if that's needed. And we're talking about a pretty big wide scale breach at that point and bringing in a kind of a cyber liability firm. So we have a couple of those vendors in our back pocket when needed. Honestly, and there's kind of a couple options for some of your clients who are aware. It's been a while now. It's pre-COVID, but there was a really big breach in Colorado, and that gained national attention because of the size and scope of it. The reason why that was so problematic, for a few different reasons, is those practices did not have reliable backup to fall back on. So really that conversation turned pretty quickly into what is the ransom? How do we pay the ransom? Which we can talk about that later. As a last resort, more often than not, it works, but there still is about a 1 in 3 chance that it does not work and you do not get your data back. So I would say prevention, proactive planning is a much better strategy than relying on paying that ransom. But that situation turned very quickly into how do we pay to get our information back because we have no way of getting our information back. So it would be customized to each office. There's no one simple answer that applies to everybody 100% of the time because there are different realities with Windows, with Mac, with cloud, with on-premises setups that all factor into that plan. But having a recovery option with on-site backups, with a cloud-based kind of an online BCDR, business continuity and disaster recovery plan. The idea there is if something is being incrementally backed up with those snapshots every 15 minutes, we can go back and recover that network, restore data without going down the pretty scary route of paying a ransom in Bitcoin.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm kind of curious. I know you kind of touched on the incident here in Colorado, but any other stories you think we need to know about or hear about that kind of just, again, help kind of bring this point to, especially I think to maybe some of our smaller docs or the smaller practices out there?
I think for mentioning that bigger breach and for any practices who still have any sort of data, I think the importance of still having an on-site backup is sometimes glossed over. Mm-hmm. We both remember the days of the old tapes that were put on a rotation and that evolved into the fancy USB drives. And how could we ever get more elaborate than that? But I think some of and especially with the emergence of the cloud, with cloud backup, with these BCDR solutions, I think there was a tendency in previous years to say, hey, having an external backup drive that you put on a rotation daily is so antiquated. This isn't 2005. We're not rotating tapes. Yes. There's no need to do that anymore. Everything's in the cloud. The problem with instances like that is it's as great as those cloud solutions are and those cloud backup solutions, they're not impenetrable. Those can be affected as well. And if you're backing up encrypted data that you don't have the access to recover from, it's entirely useless. So as antiquated as it sounds, having an on-site backup plan is still critically important in 2025. And obviously, without mentioning names, I kind of compare that to 2024, where I'll tell you, and I'm not ashamed to admit it because I said it's a question of when and not if for many practices. Cornerstone has hundreds of clients, and we have multiple clients that have ransomware events during the year. Why it's not so highly publicized is we have that good balance of on-site backups, of cloud backups. We're helping our clients do what they need to preventatively. And while it's an inconvenience, the fork in the road of we have a ransomware event, our data has been encrypted, and we're being asked to give X amount of money in Bitcoin to recover everything. The pretty scary path is, hey, we don't have a reliable backup. We have no way to get that information. What do we do? Right. And that's when we involve a cyber liability. The FBI is involved. We're talking to insurance companies about our cyber liability policy, which is something everyone should have, by the way, versus going down the road of the IT provider says, oh, yeah, it looks like there was an email that looked legit. Somebody clicked on it yesterday at 4:12 p.m. That stuff has been encrypting overnight. Lucky for you, we've actually been having these incremental backups. We're gonna restore your network to a backup that happened before 4:00 p.m. on Thursday. And we may need to piece together a couple things that happened Thursday afternoon, Friday morning, but we're going to recover you to as you were Thursday over lunch, and away we go. That's a very different story to tell, and a much less dramatic story to tell than the big breach that we've referenced.
Yeah, that's great. So gosh, I know we could keep talking, and I'm sure I'll have you on again because this is just such good information. But I'm sure there's a lot of docs that are listening right now that are maybe their hearts in their chest a little bit like, this sounds like a lot. This sounds like something I should be paying attention to. I know a lot of my docs that are out there are young docs, startup, money is tough. We're just barely figuring out how to get the practice off of the ground. So I'm wondering if you can just maybe give us some quick actionable items. I know you've been kind of dropping really great things along the way, but maybe just some actionable items or steps that they can take initially. And if you were to challenge anybody to say, hey, if you could just set aside, not that you can say a dollar amount, but there probably is something that we need to be 2025 going forward, a budgeted amount that really truly does go towards, that's going to fall somewhere in our P&L statement. That I just think we can't not do this. But we also, I know for a lot of my docs, they're also like, well, I don't have $2,000 a month to spend on something. So can you kind of help us and maybe try and set some of my docs that are probably having panic attacks, set them at ease just a little bit here?
Sure, absolutely. And I think the good part of this is all the scary things that we've talked about exist, and we need to be aware of them and vigilant in protecting and preventing them. The good news is there are so many tools that companies like Cornerstone can use in that fight on the good side. Some of the things that I mentioned, AI earlier, some of the advantages that we can see from that has dramatically transformed the way that we're doing antivirus, anti-ransomware protection, data backups, things like that. So there's a lot of good news as well. I think one of the takeaways is not something that I can help with or I can sell anybody. The first thing that I would tell anybody listening is to be intentional about promoting call it a think before you click culture at their office. Encourage staff to double check links and email addresses, verify, especially if something feels off. Think before you click. If we can wrap our head around those 4 words and everybody's on board with that, like I said, 82% of ransomware events involve some sort of human error. So if we can dial in on something that will improve 82% of the issues out there, that's the best thing that I can offer. And it's not something that I can even offer. That's something you need to talk to your team about.
Yeah.
As far as next steps from an IT provider, whether it's Cornerstone or whoever you're working with, I think doing a comprehensive network assessment is probably the next best step as far as engaging a professional. You'll need to ask whoever you work with on what that would look like. Speaking from Cornerstone, that's actually something that we do not charge for. We offer those complimentary assessments just to pinpoint gaps and provide those tailored solutions. So you had mentioned, hey, I need a game plan. Obviously, this is important stuff, but I've got to think my insurance just went up. I got to think about payroll. I got to think about this. I've got my overall budget, and this is an important puzzle piece. It's still a puzzle piece to that overall budget. Yeah. As a business owner, I feel that as well. So again, speaking for Cornerstone, we tailor plans to each individual client. It's not a one size fits all, just because every network, every environment is a little bit unique based on software they're using, based on size, and maybe even complexity of the network. To give you a high level as far as what docs should maybe think about budgeting for, I would say maybe $50 per month per computer for a managed service plan. And again, when I go back to that managed word, a managed service plan in 2025, it's very different than old school break fix support. It's standard of care in the IT world, and especially the dental and ortho IT world due to HIPAA realities, is managed services. And that simply means that your IT partner is using smart software, even some of those components, to proactively monitor and manage critical things on your network. Things like backups, antivirus, software updates, security patches, a lot of that, instead of waiting for you to notice problems and call them. I actually just went through an exercise with a client at the end of the year and taking a look at this kind of the scope of services provided. And just as a snapshot, in December, they had 27 service tickets with us, which on the surface kind of sounds like a lot. It's like, man, what kind of problems are they having on a network that you needed to help 27 times in a month? Of those 27 times, one was a phone call to our scheduling team. It was a printer issue. Hey, we can't print to this. Have somebody remote in. Away we go. 26 of the 27 service tickets were things that the client actually had no idea about. They said, oh, I thought we only called you once last month. I said, well, you did. There are actually 6 other times that either an AI agent, part of the software programs that we use, addressed something like a security patch that missed, like a software update that needed to be run, or something, and a couple of them were bigger items as far as, hey, we actually need a live human to either show up on site or remote in and take a look at this. The entire idea of managed services, again, is having an expert proactively and preventatively monitor the network rather than just set it up and wait for things to break. So whether that is somebody on staff that is dedicated to that role, whether it's outsourcing to someone like Cornerstone, it's important to have a managed service plan. So again, I think on the staff side, think before you click culture. Mm-hmm. On the professional kind of service side of things, I would say next best step for folks is to schedule a network assessment with a dental specific and ortho specific IT provider that can help identify those gaps. At least at Cornerstone, what that would look like is a full assessment of the network where we take a look at the age and health of the computers, of the firewall, what antivirus software you're using, even down to some of the more granular details of how things are set up. That would also, in all likelihood, involve a HIPAA risk assessment. That's something that needs to be done once a year, and that's something we can facilitate as well. Again, the goal of that is we get a HIPAA risk assessment, we get our score, we identify the gaps and create a game plan to address those gaps. We take that step, and then we take the risk assessment again and improve our score. For your clients that have that, they would be in a better situation in the event of a breach than 90% of practices out there. Just think of that. How many of you listening really have done in 2024, did a HIPAA risk assessment, got your score, received a game plan for what you needed to tweak, actually did it, and then took that assessment again and got 100 out of 100 and have that in a nice clean package? That's something that is very attainable. It's pretty quick and not very expensive to accomplish, honestly, and should be a part of what practices are doing on an annual basis.
That's great. And I really think that's such a pearl right there. And again, we as a whole, we just have to think about this differently. I think we had this period where we could kind of float through and, we don't need to worry. We're on the cloud. We don't need to worry. We use Macs. We don't need to worry. Somebody else is thinking about that. And it's other industries that are being affected by this. And I just think for all of us, especially so many of my younger docs that are starting off, this just has to be something. Even myself as a consultant moving forward, I am even committing to just pushing my docs a little bit more on, let's make sure we're thinking about these things. And I love the idea of just taking a little assessment. We do this with everything else. We have to do that with as much as we're doing right now with computers in our practices. And we just have more exposure than I think we ever have in the past. So As we finish up, gosh, I know, Jordan, we could just talk and talk, and we'll definitely do a part 2 to this later on this year. But if somebody wants to reach out to you, and I've got docs across the United States, but what's the best way if they're just like, gosh, I really think I just need to reach out to Jordan and just at least maybe have a basic assessment or whatnot? What's the best way that they can do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We'd be happy to help with any of that. And we help docs all across the country as well. The pricing that I had thrown out there just as kind of something that hopefully is helpful to folks to think about, okay, overall budget, if I got 10 computers, I probably need to budget $500 a month for a proper managed service plan. If I've got 20 computers, it's probably closer to $1,000 a month. That's all, like I mentioned, customizable. It needs to be edited to the needs of each practice. So we can do that, certainly in person. We do that, those remote assessments for anybody all across the country. So happy to help with that. Like I mentioned, it's complimentary. It's not something that we charge for. I think our strategy with that is on the front end. If we can help provide valuable information on exposing some gaps, giving some good recommendations on what needs to be done. If we're the ones to help close those gaps, great, happy to do it. If that information is used to have somebody incumbent, hey, I got an assessment, I think we need to take a look at this, great. The important thing is that our practices are taken care of. If we can help with that, we'd love to, but there are a lot of good people out there who do what we do and can help as well. I think on the other side, again, if it makes sense for both of us, our company is certainly able and willing to add clients and help in any way we can. So honestly, reaching out to me personally is the best option. My cell phone number is 303-241-9758. And my email is Jordan, my first name, Jordan, at cstonedental.net. So the letter C, the word stone, dental, net. And if you want to give me a call, shoot me a text, shoot me an email. Really, next step on our end would be coordinating either an on-site or a remote assessment. After that, we will provide the practice with, if you think of it as a technology treatment plan, and hopefully that information is helpful, whichever direction they go from there.
Yeah, that's great. And be prepared, Jordan. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of calls.
Good.
So this has been great. Again, why I have been waiting to have you on, because this is just information we need to hear. Year after year, it's changing. There's so many things that we need to just keep our eyes on. And I think in our industry specifically, as we continue to go more digital, and we are truly basing our practices a lot of times around those computers, we just not think about them, and teaching team members how to be more vigilant. And I love the idea. I even think of just a little sticker on a computer, think before you click. I mean, it really is so simple, but could really save us, so much money in the long run. So the way I like to finish up Hey Docs is I like to do a speed round just to get to know you a little bit better. Are you ready to jump into a speed round challenge?
Let's do it.
What is one business trend you think more people should be paying attention to?
AI comes to mind for me. It's very buzzy to talk about AI, but in a very real way, it's fundamentally reshaping how we are doing our business, talking about protecting data, staying ahead of threats. Obviously, it extends much past our dental or ortho worlds, but I think that'll have a pretty dramatic change on everything that we're doing, even more so than it already has.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. All right, what's the most unexpected lesson you've learned in your career?
I'd say that saying no to the wrong fit is just as important as saying yes to the right fit. I think that applies to our docs deep. As well. That when it comes to patients, if you have that, my son is 3, about to turn 4, and he is in all things Spider-Man. Now, my house is the Spider-Verse, but sometimes if you get that Spidey tingle, it's not every partnership is worth the stress. I'll say that.
That's and that definitely comes from some experience, because that was a hard lesson. I think every business owner has to learn that. And when you can learn to say no, it's a beautiful thing. You don't need to work with everybody. I love that. If you could give your younger self one piece of career advice, what would it be?
Well, I think to give you some credit, Jill, I think not being afraid to get really specific with what you offer and doing a really excellent job and being the expert in a smaller niche is a really good thing. It can be a lot more rewarding than trying to do everything. And again, as someone younger who's maybe conditioned to, well, yes, I'm going to take on that project. Yes, I'm going to take on that client. Yes, we can do IT support for a restaurant as well. I think not being afraid to get really specific with what we offer and what we do best is a good thing, and something that younger Jordan could have benefited from.
Yeah. And I think that's just something we learn as business owners, right? Like in the beginning, you're hungry for anything and everything. And as we mature, we start to realize deep, not wide, sometimes makes a big difference there. All right. And then to finish us up, if you had resources, what's one big idea you would bring to life?
Well, gosh, until this week, I would have said something like the golf league. I don't know how many golfers are out there. I'm a huge golfer. My dad got me started when I was really little. I played in high school and college, but blending the sport I love with some of that technology they're using was pretty awesome. That was a little bit of a golf nerd, but watching Golf League kick off this week with all the simulators and technology that they put together, that was pretty cool.
Yeah, you're like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah, right?
Oh, well, that's awesome. Well, you don't know this, but believe it or not, I have never really ever played golf. And that is one of my goals, is to learn to play golf. So maybe I'll make
25 goals.
Yeah, I'll make you meet me on a course and you can just suffer through with me for a little bit of time. So, well, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on Hey Docs. And I would love to have you on again, but I just want to thank you that the information was fantastic. And I'm sure a lot of docs just learned a lot from this little last hour here with us.
Absolutely. Hopefully it was helpful. We at Cornerstone are big fans of you and what you do. So thank you for all you do, Joe.
Yep. All right. Till next time.